The Convergence fleet moved through the empty space between galaxies like a giant metal cloud. 1,200 warships from 17 different alien species traveled together under the flag of the Galactic Concordat. They had been traveling for 3 standard cycles now, and nothing interesting had happened. The void between galaxies was empty and boring, and most of the crew members had fallen into a comfortable routine. Admiral Vythaner stood on the command bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Mandate, and watched the darkness outside. He was a Tyrellian, which meant he had gray-scaled skin and 4 arms and 4 hearts beating inside his chest. His species had been part of the Concordat for over 2,000 cycles, and he had served in the fleet for most of his adult life. He had seen many things, but he had never expected to see what happened next. Sensor Officer let out a strange sound that was half scream and half choke. Vythaner turned to look at her and saw that her scales had turned completely white, which was a sign of extreme fear in their species. Before he could ask what was wrong, the alarm systems on the entire ship began to scream. "Admiral," the Sensor Officer said in a shaking voice, "a vessel has just dropped out of faster than light travel directly ahead of us. 1 vessel against 1,200 ships." Vythaner said calmly, "This is not worth such panic. Identified a ship and hailed him." The Sensor Officer did not move. She just stared at her screen with eyes that had gone wide and empty. Vythaner walked over to her station and looked at the data himself. What he saw made all 4 of his hearts stop beating at the same time. The ship was small and crude and built with technology that looked ancient by Concordat standards. It had chemical thrusters and a fusion reactor that leaked radiation into space. Its hull was thin and weak and would break apart under a single plasma burst. But none of that mattered because of the identification signal it was broadcasting human. Word spread through the fleet faster than any disease could travel. Within seconds, every ship in the Convergence fleet knew what had appeared before them. Communications channels exploded with panicked voices speaking in dozens of different languages. Officers abandoned their stations and ran through corridors without knowing where they were going. Some crew members simply collapsed where they stood as their minds refused to accept what was happening. 3. Ships broke formation entirely. Their captains did not ask for permission or give any warning. They simply activated their emergency jump drives and fled into the void. 2 more ships followed seconds later, then another 4. The Great Convergence fleet was falling apart like a building made of sand. Vythaner gripped the command rail with all 4 of his clawed hands and forced himself to breathe. He had trained for combat situations his entire life. He had faced pirates and rebels and natural disasters. But nothing in his training had prepared him for this moment, because everyone had believed this moment was impossible. The humans had been locked away behind the veil for 600 cycles. Every species in the Galactic Concordat had agreed to build it and maintain it, and guard it with their lives. The veil was supposed to be unbreakable. The humans were supposed to stay in their home system forever. They were never supposed to leave, and yet here one was, Admiral. His second officer said in a voice that was barely a whisper, "It is just 1 ship. It is barely armed. We could destroy it with a single volley from any of our vessels." Vythaner turned to look at the young officer with something close to pity in his eyes. The boy was young and he had not lived through the old times. He had only read about the humans in history files that most species tried to forget existed. "You fool," Vythaner said quietly. "There is no such thing as just 1 human." The young officer opened his mouth to respond, but Vythaner raised one of his hands to silence him. On the main view screen, the human vessel hung motionless in space. It made no aggressive moves. It did not charge weapons or ray shields. It simply waited. That was somehow more terrifying than if it had Atakid. Vythaner looked around his bridge and saw that most of his crew had stopped functioning. Some were crying. Some were praying to gods that had not been worshipped in centuries. His weapons officer had pulled out a personal sidearm and was pointing it at her own head with shaking hands. "Put that down," Vythaner commanded. "We do not know what this means yet. It means we are dead," the weapons officer said. "The humans are free. The veil has failed. We are all dead." Vythaner walked over to her and gently took the weapon from her hands. She did not resist. She simply slumped against her console and began to sob. He had never seen her cry before. She had fought in 12 major battles without showing any fear, but this was different. This was humans, and new communication came through from the fleet. It was from High Commander Thessaly of the Vylorian ships. Her crystalline form appeared on screen, and Vythaner could see that parts of her body were cracking from stress. "Admiral Vythaner," she said, "we must destroy that vessel immediately. We must destroy it before it can send a message back to its people." "And what if they already know?" Vythaner asked. "What if this ship is here because the humans sent it? What if there are more coming behind it?" Thessaly had no answer for that. Her form flickered and more cracks appeared across her surface. Vythaner had never seen a Vylorian so close to shattering. "We need to call a council," Vythaner said. "All species representatives must meet in my war room immediately. We cannot make this decision alone. There is no time for councils," Thessaly shouted. "We must act now." "That is exactly what the old ones thought 600 cycles ago," Vythaner replied. "They acted without thinking. They attacked without understanding. And look where that brought us. Look at the fear that fills this fleet at the sight of one small ship." He turned back to the view screen where the human vessel continued to wait. It had not moved. It had not threatened. It simply existed, and that existence had thrown the mightiest fleet in the galaxy into chaos. "The humans are here," Vythaner said to no one in particular. "And we need to find out why before we do something that dooms us all." The war room of the Eternal Mandate was the largest chamber on the ship, and it had been designed to hold representatives from every species in the Concordat. Holographic projectors lined the walls and the ceiling, so that those who could not attend in person could still participate. Admiral Vythaner had called for an emergency meeting, but only 11 of the 17 species had responded. The other 6 had already fled. Vythaner stood at the center of the room and watched as the representatives appeared one by one. The Kethri ambassador materialized first, and her bioluminescent skin was flickering between colors so fast that it was hard to look at her. She was terrified, and her body could not hide it. The Mordani delegate appeared next, but he had retreated completely into his defensive shell and refused to come out no matter how many times his name was called. The Vylorian representative High Commander Thessaly took her position across from Vythaner, and her crystalline body was still showing the cracks from their earlier conversation. The Sundari coalition sent Commander Rethka, who was a tall insectoid creature with sharp mandibles and compound eyes that reflected delight in strange ways. Unlike the others, Rethka did not seem afraid. He seemed angry. "This is ridiculous," Rethka said as soon as all the representatives had gathered. "Look at us, the mightiest military alliance in the galaxy, and we are shaking like prey animals because of one small ship. You do not understand," the Kethri ambassador said. "You were not there during the Unification Wars. Your species joined the Concordat after the Veil was built. You have never faced the humans in battle. I have read the history files," Rethka replied dismissively. "The humans were dangerous, yes, but that was 600 cycles ago. We have advanced our technology since then. We have grown stronger. One primitive ship cannot threaten 1,200 warships." Admiral Vythaner raised one of his hands and activated the holographic display at the center of the room. Images began to appear in the air above them. Images that most species in the Concordat tried very hard to forget. "Let me show you something, Commander," Vythaner said. "Let me show you why we are afraid." The first image was of a planet. It was beautiful, with blue oceans and green continents and white clouds swirling across its surface. Text appeared beneath it, identifying it as Kethri Prime, the homeworld of the Kethri species. This was Kethri Prime before the humans came. Vythaner said the image changed. The same planet appeared, but now it was different. The oceans had turned black. The continents were covered in ash and fire. The clouds were thick with smoke and debris. Nothing lived on that world anymore. This was Kethri Prime after the humans left. The Kethri ambassador made a sound of pure grief, and her bioluminescent skin went completely dark. She had been born on a colony world because her original homeworld no longer existed. An entire planet burned to nothing because the humans had decided it needed to burn more. Images appeared, planet after planet, system after system. Some were burned like Kethri Prime. Others were cracked open with their cores exposed to space. A few had simply vanished as if they had never existed at all. The humans had weapons that could destroy entire worlds, and they had used them without hesitation. The Tyrellian hegemony lost 42 billion citizens during the Unification Wars. Vythaner said, "We were one of the luckier species. The Mordani were reduced from 800 colony worlds to 12 breeding stations. The Thesan collective was completely destroyed and exists now only in genetic archives." Commander Rethka had stopped looking angry. His compound eyes were fixed on the images, and his mandibles had stopped moving. For the first time since the meeting began, he looked like he was beginning to understand. "How?" he asked quietly. "How did one species do all of this? That is the question we have been asking for 600 cycles." Vythaner replied, "The humans had inferior technology when they first met us. Their ships were slower and weaker. Their weapons were primitive, but they had something that none of us had ever seen before." He changed the display to show tactical recordings from the old wars. Human ships flew in patterns that made no sense. They attacked when they should have retreated. They retreated when they should have surrendered. They did things that no military strategist could predict because they did not follow any rules that the galaxy understood. They call it total war. Vythaner explained, "When humans fight, they do not stop until one side is completely destroyed. They do not accept surrender. They do not negotiate peace. They do not recognize defeat. They simply keep fighting until there is nothing left to fight. That is insane." Rethka said, "Yes, it is. And that insanity made them unstoppable." The Vylorian representative Thessaly spoke up for the first time since the meeting began. "We did stop them eventually. The Concordat formed specifically to fight the humans. We united 17 species, and we pushed them back to their home system." "Did we stop them?" Vythaner asked, "or did they let us stop them?" The question hung in the air, and no one had an answer. It was something that historians had debated for centuries. The humans had been winning the war. They had destroyed hundreds of species and conquered thousands of worlds. And then suddenly they had stopped. They had pulled back all their forces to their home system and allowed the Concordat to build the veil around them. No one knew why. Perhaps they ran out of resources? The Kethri ambassador suggested weakly. They had the resources of 1,000 conquered worlds. Perhaps they suffered internal conflict. They were fighting internal conflicts the entire time they were conquering us. It did not slow them down. Perhaps they simply grew tired of killing. That suggestion came from the Mordani delegate, who had finally emerged from his shell. His eye stalks were trembling, but he forced himself to speak. Everyone turned to look at him because it was such a strange thing to say. The history showed that the humans were not unified. The Mordani continued. They had many factions, and those factions often disagreed. Perhaps some of them decided that the killing needed to stop. Admiral Vythaner looked at the holographic display where the human ship still waited in the darkness of space. It had been there for hours now, and it had made no aggressive moves. It simply waited as if it had all the time in the universe. "There's only one way to find out why they are here," Vythaner said. "We need to talk to them." The room erupted in protest, but Vythaner had already made his decision. For 600 cycles, the galaxy had lived in fear of the humans. For 600 cycles, they had wondered what was happening behind the veil. Now a human ship had appeared, and it was not attacking. That meant something. And Vythner was going to find out what. Every officer on the bridge of the Eternal Mandate begged Admiral Vythner not to open a communication channel with the human vessel. They told him it was a trap. They told him the humans would use the connection to hack into their systems. They told him he was dooming the entire fleet by even attempting contact Vidal, listened to all of their concerns, and then ordered the channel. Opened anyway. The view screen flickered, and then a face appeared. It was the first time most of the crew had ever seen a living human. They had seen images in history files and educational programs, but those were old recordings from 600 cycles ago. This was different. This was real. The human was female, according to the old records. She was small by human standards, standing barely 2 meters tall. Her hair was dark but streaked with gray, and her skin was a warm brown color. Lines marked her face around her eyes and mouth, showing that she had lived many cycles. But her eyes were what caught Vythner's attention. They were calm and patient, and they held no fear at all. "I am Captain Elena Vasquez of the Earth vessel Olive Branch," the human said. "I come with a message from the human collective." Her voice was softer than Vythner had expected. The recordings from the old wars showed humans screaming battle cries and roaring in triumph as they destroyed enemy ships. This woman sounded like she was having a quiet conversation over a meal. "You are in violation of the Veil Accords," Vythner replied, and he was proud, but his voice did not shake. "Your presence here is an act of war. Return to your space immediately, or you will be destroyed." Captain Vasquez smiled, and it was a gentle expression that seemed strange on the face of a human. In the old recordings, humans only smiled when they were killing something. This smile was different. This smile looked almost sad. "Admiral, with respect, if humanity wanted war, we would not have sent a single unarmed research vessel crewed by scientists and diplomats," she said. "We would have sent our fleet." "You have no fleet," Vythner said. "The veil prevents you from building ships capable of faster than light travel. You are contained. The veil has been permeable to us for approximately 400 cycles," Captain Vasquez replied. "We developed countermeasures within the first 2 centuries. We have been watching you ever since." The bridge went completely silent. Vythner felt as if the deck had disappeared beneath his feet. 400 cycles. The humans had been able to leave their space for 400 cycles, and the Concordat had never known. All that time spent believing they were safe, and the humans could have attacked at any moment. "You are lying," Vythner said, but even he did not believe his own words. "I am not. And I can prove it." Captain Vasquez made a gesture and data began streaming through the communication channel. "These are detailed scans of Concordat space taken by human observation probes over the past 4 centuries. We have mapped every system. We have cataloged every fleet. We know the location of every military installation and every civilian population center." The data appeared on secondary screens around the bridge, and officers began reviewing it with growing horror. It was accurate. Every piece of information was correct down to the smallest detail. The humans had been watching them for 400 cycles, and they had learned everything. "If this is true," Vythner said slowly, "why reveal yourselves now? Why not simply attack?" Captain Vasquez was quiet for a moment, and her expression changed to something that might have been pain. "May I tell you a story, Admiral?" "It is a story about my species, and I think you need to hear it." Vythner nodded because he did not trust himself to speak. 600 cycles ago, humanity went to war with the galaxy. Captain Vasquez began. "We were young and afraid, and we did not understand the species we encountered. When we met alien life for the first time, they attacked us. They called us primitive, and they tried to take our world. We fought back." "You did more than fight back," Vythner said. "You burned entire civilizations." "Yes, we did. And that is the part of the story I need you to understand. Captain Vasquez leaned forward slightly, and her eyes never left the screen. When we fight, we do not stop. It is something in our nature that we cannot control. Our ancestors survived on Earth because they never gave up. They faced predators larger and stronger than themselves, and they survived by being more stubborn, more determined, more willing to do whatever it took to win. We know this, Vythaner said. That is why we built the Veil. But you do not know what happened after the Veil was built, Captain Vasquez said. You do not know what we did when we were alone with ourselves. She paused, and something dark passed across her face like a cloud crossing the sun. We looked at what we had done. We looked at the worlds we had burned and the species we had destroyed and the billions of lives we had ended. And we felt something that your Concordat never expected from us. What did you feel? Vythaner asked. Shame. The word hung in the air between them. It was such a small word, but it carried the weight of 600 cycles of history. Vythaner had studied humans his entire life. He had read every report and watched every recording. He had never once considered that they might feel shame for what they had done. We are monsters, Admiral, Captain Vasquez continued. We know that, we have always known that, but we do not want to be monsters anymore. We spent 600 cycles trying to change, trying to become something better. And now we are here to ask for a chance to prove that we have succeeded. She held up her hands in a gesture that was clearly meant to show she held no weapons. We call this ship the Olive Branch, because that is an old human symbol of peace. We come to you, unarmed and undefended, because we want you to understand that we are not here to fight. We are here to talk. Vythaner stared at the human woman on his screen and tried to reconcile what he was seeing with everything he had been taught about her species. This was not the face of a conqueror. This was not the voice of a destroyer. This was something he had never expected. This was a human asking for forgiveness. Why should we believe you? He asked finally. Why should we trust anything you say? Captain Vasquez smiled again, and this time there were tears in her eyes. Because we are giving you the choice. 600 cycles ago, we took that choice away from the galaxy. We decided who lived and who died without asking anyone else's opinion. Now we are asking. We are giving you the power to destroy us if you wish. One command from you and our ship is gone. She spread her arms wide, as if offering herself up for destruction. All we ask is that you listen first. Listen to what we have become, and then decide if the universe has room for a humanity that wants to be better. Captain Vasquez transmitted the files without waiting for permission and for the next. Several hours, the representatives of 11 species watched 600 cycles of human history unfold before their eyes. It was not the history they expected. It was not the history anyone in the galaxy could have imagined. The first century after the Veil was built had been chaos. The human factions that had united to fight the galaxy turned on each other almost immediately. Some believed they should have continued the war until every alien was dead. Others believed the war had been wrong from the beginning. These factions fought each other with the same ferocity they had once used against the Concordat. Billions of humans died. The images were brutal and hard to watch. Cities burned, continents became wastelands. Weapons that had been designed to destroy alien worlds were now being used on human populations. The representatives watched in silence as humanity tore itself apart. We call this period the Reckoning, Captain Vasquez explained. It was the price we paid for what we had done to you. After 2 centuries of civil war, a new faction emerged. They called themselves the Collective, and they were led by a council of humans who had studied the old wars carefully. These humans had asked a simple question that no one had asked before. Why were we so good at destruction? The answer they found changed everything. Human beings evolved on a world that was constantly trying to kill us. Captain Vasquez said, Predators hunted us. Diseases attacked us. The climate changed and threatened to wipe us out. We survived because we learned to fight back against anything that threatened us. We developed an instinct that other species do not have. The display showed diagrams of human brain structure and psychological profiles that had been compiled over centuries of study. When a human is threatened, we do not have biological limiters that tell us when to stop fighting. Most species in the galaxy have these limiters. When one animal defeats another in combat, the loser shows submission, and the winner accepts that submission. The fight ends before either side is destroyed. Admiral Vythaner nodded slowly. This was true for Tyrellians. When two Tyrellians fought, the loser would expose their throat, and the winner would accept the gesture. To continue attacking after a submission display was considered insane. Humans have no such instinct. Captain Vasquez continued. When we fight until the threat is completely eliminated. We cannot stop ourselves. It is written into our very nature. When the galaxy attacked us, we did not see individual species with their own hopes and dreams and cultures. We saw threats that needed to be eliminated. You are saying you cannot help what you are, Commander Rethke said. You are saying the destruction of hundreds of species was not your fault. No, Captain Vasquez said firmly. I am saying we understand why we did what we did. Understanding is not the same as excusing. We were responsible for our actions, even if those actions came from instincts we did not choose. And that responsibility is what drove us to change. The display shifted to show images of human society in the centuries after the reckoning. Schools where children were taught about the alien species their ancestors had destroyed. Memorials on every world listing the names of civilizations that no longer existed because of human aggression. Therapy programs designed to help humans recognize and control their violent impulses. We built a society that acknowledged what we are, Captain Vasquez said. We do not pretend to be peaceful by nature. We are not. We are predators who learned cooperation. We are killers who developed empathy. Both of these things are true, and we cannot ignore either one. And this works, Admiral Vythaner asked. Your people can control their nature now. Not perfectly, Captain Vasquez admitted. There are still humans who give in to violence. There are still conflicts and crimes and acts of aggression. But they are individual failures, not societal ones. Our culture teaches us that our instincts are dangerous and that we must always be vigilant against them. She paused, and her expression became deeply serious. We have also developed technology to help us. Every human child is educated from birth about the dangers of unchecked aggression. We have treatments that can help individuals who struggle to control their impulses. We monitor ourselves constantly for signs that we are slipping back into old patterns. You have turned yourselves into your own prison, the Kethri ambassador said. You live in constant fear of what you might become. Yes, Captain Vasquez said. And we do it willingly because we remember what happened when we did not. We remember the burning worlds and the dead civilizations and the billions of lives we ended. That memory is our greatest treasure because it reminds us why we must never stop being vigilant. The Murdani delegate emerged fully from his shell for the first time since the meeting began. His eye stalks were steady now, and his voice was calm. You said you have been watching us for 400 cycles, he said. Why did you not make contact sooner? Why did you wait until now? Because we needed to be sure, Captain Vasquez replied. We needed to prove to ourselves that we could resist the temptation to conquer. For 400 cycles, we watched your species grow and expand, and we did nothing. We had the power to destroy you at any time, but we chose not to use it. She smiled, and it was a smile of genuine pride. We wanted to show ourselves that we were capable of restraint, that we could see something we could take and choose not to take it. Every cycle that passed without us attacking was proof that we were becoming something different, something better. Admiral Vythaner looked at the human woman on his screen and felt something. He had never expected to feel toward a human he felt respect. What do you want from us now? He asked. We want to rejoin the galactic community, Captain Vasquez said. Not as conquerors, but as partners. We have spent 600 cycles developing in isolation. We have made advances in science and medicine and technology that we would like to share. And we would like to learn from you as well. She spread her hands in a gesture of openness. We are not asking you to forget what we did. We do not deserve to be forgotten. We are asking for the chance to prove that the humans of today are not the humans of 600 cycles ago. We are asking for the chance to earn your trust, even though we know we do not deserve it. The representatives looked at each other in silence. No one knew what to say. For 600 cycles, the humans had been the monsters hiding behind the veil. Now one of those monsters was standing before them, asking for forgiveness, and none of them knew how to respond. Admiral Vythaner stood alone in his private quarters, staring at the data packet Captain Vasquez had transmitted. It contained everything humanity had learned in 600 cycles of isolation. Technical specifications for technologies the Concordat had never imagined. Medical treatments that could cure diseases thought to be incurable. Agricultural methods that could feed populations on worlds previously considered barren. It also contained maps. The map showed human space and what Vythaner saw there made his 4 hearts beat faster. While the Concordat had believed the humans were trapped behind the veil, they had expanded to 47 star systems. They had built cities on moons and asteroids and space stations. Their population had grown to numbers that dwarfed most Concordat species, and they had ships, thousands of ships. Ships that made the Eternal Mandate look like a child's toy humanity could have attacked at any time. They could have swept across the galaxy and finished what they started 600 cycles ago. With their technology and their numbers and their terrible instinct for war, they could have destroyed the Concordat in a matter of cycles, but they had not. They had watched and waited and built their civilization in secret. They had proven to themselves that they could resist the urge to conquer. And now they were asking for peace. The door to his quarters chimed, and Vythaner called for the visitor to enter. It was the Kethri ambassador, and her bioluminescent skin had settled into a soft blue color that indicated thoughtfulness rather than fear. The fleet commanders have reached a decision, she said. We will hear the human proposal. Vythaner nodded slowly. He had expected this outcome, but he was still surprised by how quickly it had come. Just hours ago, these same commanders had been ready to flee at the sight of a human vessel. Now they were willing to negotiate. What changed their minds? He asked. Captain Vasquez's files, the ambassador replied. They showed us something we never expected. They showed us humans holding themselves accountable for what they did. They showed us humans choosing to change, even when they did not have to. She moved to stand beside Vythaner at the viewport where the tiny olive branch still hung against the stars. It was such a small ship, so fragile, so vulnerable. The humans had sent it knowing that it could be destroyed in an instant. The humans sent one ship, the ambassador continued, unarmed and undefended to a fleet that could destroy it in seconds. They sent a captain old enough to remember their history and humble enough to admit their shame and brave enough to ask for a second chance. She turned to look at Vythaner, and her lights flickered with something that might have been hope. If that is a trap, it is the most elaborate one in galactic history. And if it is not, then perhaps the humans have achieved something no species ever has. Perhaps they looked at their own nature and truly looked and chose to become something better. Vythaner thought about the burning worlds he had seen in the historical archives. He thought about the 42 billion Terrellians who had died in the unification wars. He thought about the centuries of fear that had shaped every decision the Concordat had ever made. Then he thought about Captain Vasquez's eyes filled with tears as she asked for the chance to prove that humanity had changed. Open a channel, he said finally. Tell Captain Vasquez we are ready to talk. The negotiations lasted for 3 standard cycles, and they were the most difficult conversations in galactic history. Old wounds were opened, old grievances were aired. Species that had lost homeworlds demanded to know how the humans could ever make amends for what they had done. Captain Vasquez did not make excuses. She did not try to minimize what humanity had done. She simply acknowledged every crime and every death and every destroyed civilization. She offered no justification, only acknowledgement and apology and a commitment to do better. In the end, a new treaty was signed. The veil would remain in place for another century, while humanity proved its commitment to peace. Human observers would be allowed in Concordat space, and Concordat observers would be allowed in human space. Trade would begin slowly, and cultural exchanges would follow. It was not forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a beginning. 200 cycles later, a statue stood in the central plaza of a new capital. The capital had been built in neutral space, designed by architects from 17 different species working together for the first time in history. At the center of the plaza stood a monument that depicted an outstretched hand human in design holding a small branch with leaves. Admiral Vythaner visited the statue every cycle on the anniversary of the first contact. He was ancient now, and his scales had faded to silver, and his movements were slow and careful. But he still came every cycle, because he wanted to remember his great-grandchildren played in the shadow of the statue chasing young Kethri, whose lights sparkled with joy. Mordani younglings clicked and laughed as they dodged between the older children. Human children ran alongside them, and no one thought anything strange. About a human child bumped into Vythaner's leg and looked up with wide eyes. She was perhaps 5 cycles old, with dark hair and brown skin and eyes that reminded him of Captain Vasquez. "Sorry," she said quickly, and then raced off. After her friends, Vythaner watched her go and remembered the terror he had felt that day when the sensors had first screamed. He remembered saying there is no such thing as just one human. He had been right, but not in the way he expected, where one human went, others followed. They could not help it because it was their nature. But they did not bring destruction anymore. They brought curiosity and creativity and a fierce determination to make things better. Statue gleamed in the light of 3 suns, and Vythaner read the inscription carved into its base for the 1000th time. To those who came before us, we offer our memory. To those who stand beside us, we offer our hands. To those who come after us, we offer our hope. May we never forget what we were, so that we may always remember what we can become. A human had written those words. A human who had studied the wars and the death and the destruction, and had still believed that something better was possible. That human was long dead now, but their words lived on, and so did their hope. Of Vythaner looked up at the statue one more time, and then turned to walk toward his great-grandchildren. The little human girl was trying to teach a Mordani youngling how to play a clapping game, and both of them were laughing at their failures. This was what humanity had given the galaxy. Not the conquest they had once threatened, not the destruction they had once promised, but something far more valuable. They had given the galaxy proof that any species, no matter how violent or dangerous or terrifying, could choose to be something better. They had shown that nature was not destiny, and that the worst of what you are does not have to define what you become. The sensors had detected a human-made vessel 200 cycles ago, and the signal had sparked chaos in the fleet. But out of that chaos had come something no one expected. Out of that chaos had come peace, and in the shadow of the statue, as children of a dozen species played together without fear, Vythaner smiled and knew that the chaos had been worth it. The humans had changed, and in changing, they had changed everything. That was the truth the galaxy had learned from the species they once feared above all others. That was the gift of the olive branch.